What's up, duelists? It's your boy, Keegan, and I'm here today with a very, very special guest, Dimitri. What's up, Dimitri? How are you doing today?
What's up, Keegan? Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Last weekend was RBET Rulers, and it's honestly my favorite part of the year, watching the highest level gameplay Edison all year round. And you were powerful enough, I want to say, strong enough to take down the entire tournament. How does it feel? How does it feel to
Tacky
win?
enough for sure, yeah. It
I
feels
mean,
very good. I I mean, okay, you gave the nickname Burial Dad Dimitri, and looking at the replays, it happened a ton, but it feels so good to do that, admittedly. And this is my first tournament win, so it's a great one to have won for sure.
true, true. You do have a large number of tops. We're going to get into all of that here in a second. But first things, before we get into everything, um, to everyone watching this video, go and check out Dimitri at Dimitri Yugioh underscore on YouTube. They're seeing your page right now, and subscribe to him. He's going to be posting all of his matches from RBET Rulers. And you said you were doing some Edison content as well. Is that something you're looking to do moving forward?
Yeah, I'm looking to probably get daily release schedule for a while at least, doing like deck build theory stuff, like how to build better, how to get better at the game, how to prepare for tournaments, and then like some ladder grinding and everything. Yeah, looking to get into content grind. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, that's exciting. I'm excited to watch some of your videos. You're a very strong player, and it's always exciting to watch you play a lot of high octane decks. We're gonna start off today's little interview with a deck that you sent me. That you said this was the first deck you ever built for Edison format. Is that is that
Talking about
true?
high octane decks, this one is maybe low octane or maybe a little too high octane. Yeah, it's the first thing I built for Edison that I remember that I ever posted in the format, and it's spicy for sure.
It's pretty sweet. It's a Raviel Prisma Dark Calling deck. It's a little cursed, but you know it does the job. Honestly, it looks a
For
lot
sure.
better than my first Edison deck. I think my first Edison deck had like Marshmallow in it and like a bunch of other just like terrible cards. So, unsurprisingly,
Yeah.
this looks very good. So, you started off
One
strong.
thing to note with this,
Yes,
yeah, this was the first ever Dark Calling Prisma deck in the Edison format Discord. Like it
true.
had not been explored at all previously.
Yes, you kind of were the spark to the flame on not only this but a couple of other strategies, but definitely on this. I wonder if Zitalos, do you speak to him much? If he took inspiration from this to create
I
his.
I don't much. I mean, I know that it went from this to people realizing, oh, you don't actually have to road Raviel, you can just road the Malicious Edge. And so it went like slowly to the Zitalos build. But I didn't have much direct talk afterwards about that. I sort of hid from this deck a bit because it's so cursed, my build of it.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like Lord of Phantasms is definitely one of those like you just showed up to your first locals type card. Even though this is a much more competitive use
Yep.
of the card, but yeah, good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah.
After that, I mean, it wasn't that much more time until you were like topping your first tournament, right? How did you actually? How did you get into Edison format? Before we move on to your first top, was it a later thing, or did you
Yeah.
play back in the day, or
No, I stopped right around when Synchros came out, and I was playing only Playground Yu-Gi-Oh as a kid. I got back into Yu-Gi-Oh first through Duel Links, got into competitive Duel Links, and eventually found like MBT's channel and stuff. And so I was then watching History of Yu-Gi-Oh. And when they got to Edison and they mentioned you, I started following your channel, watching your channel, and that was right after Ribbit 1 that I really got into the scene then. And then yeah, by Ribbit 2 I had my first top. So it was
yeah?
mainly your channel that got me into it.
That's crazy. That's actually super crazy. Because like a lot of these guys, right? They're like super old school players, but it's awesome to see someone who can like come from just like absorbing info that's been kind of regurgitated on my channel, and then like have a ton of tournament success. So that's really sick to hear. I had no idea that that was honestly the case.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's cool that you came from Duel Links as well. Did you play Duel Links a lot until you ran out of money, or how exactly did you
No, I've always
transition?
made a rule to never put more money into the game than I make in tournaments. And so I never put that much money into Duel Links, but I ended up transitioning because it got into like the pendulum stuff that just wasn't, or I think when it got into Xyz, I started to get less interested. So that was when I started transitioning out and finding older formats that stuck with the Synchro era.
It's really interesting that you mentioned Duel Links too, because I think Duel Links was a big part of the reason why I came back to Yu-Gi-Oh as well. It was like I think around like 2018, 2019, something like that, and um, my cousin who I had played like as a kid with, he was like, "Yo, you got to get this Yu-Gi-Oh mobile game. It's awesome." And like we were swinging Blue Eyes White Dragon at each other, and I was like, I started getting more into Edison
So
again.
sick.
So it's kind of funny that we have a
Yeah.
similar origin. But yeah, your first top, I'm gonna jump over to that deck list. This was kind of like the first time we had ever seen hybrid Blackwings, basically, right?
Yes, this was the first top with hybrid Blackwings since maybe I'm sure there were some in like 2010 itself, but no one had been playing it at the time at the like Ribbit times. Yeah.
Yeah. This list is fire. I still think this list holds up today. Honestly, like you've got your signature cards in there, Burial Dark Armed. Is there anything you would change about this list looking past on, or is there anything like any specific notes you want to say about this deck list, like that you thought was super
I think
cool at the time?
zero I think zero Bora is definitely wrong. Um, I think that was a big oversight. I do think you need sub amount, probably two minimum, but a big part of the advantage of hybrid is just getting a higher monster count and getting more names, essentially. And when you take out other names to add in Greffers, it's just not worth it. Yeah.
I mean, you did top the biggest. This was the biggest RBET, if I remember correctly. It was also the one with the highest stakes because we had a sponsor for this one. Um, so you managed to top it with Zero Bora. And yeah, Zero Bora, I'll take a little bit of credit for that mistake. I'll say it. I'll say it. I think definitely not optimal
I think
building.
it's really good to push deck building too far in a direction. Like before you figure out what is optimal, figure out what people are doing too much of, and then just go way in the opposite direction. And things like this with Zero Bora is exactly that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And this was kind of a precursor. Like you topped this one, and then Monster Gamer, I believe he won the next one, and he was only playing two Bora. So it makes
Yeah,
perfect
yeah,
sense that
exactly.
like you went like, okay, what happens when we cut this entirely? It still works, but maybe we still need some of it. And then he brought back some of it and immediately had success. So that's really interesting. It's really unique. Also, the sideboard pot of avarice. That's I swear I'm not sure if I
Yeah,
stole this from you or
that's
if you stole
very
this from
funny.
me, but it's funny to see it like actually have that level of success at least earlier on in the RBET series.
It didn't come up at all in the tournament, but I remember when planning for it being like, okay, I have 14 side deck slots figured out, and I just can't figure out what I want for the last slot. And then you had a video like talking about, yeah, I'll just shove an avarice in this side, and I'm like, you know what? Sure, let's go with that. Why not?
Yeah,
Grand Mall was definitely really underrated in this side, by the way. It was amazing for me.
interesting. Interesting. I think Grandma was like really forward thinking at the time. I think now reflecting back on the format, I'm like pretty surprised that I haven't been playing Grandma in like just about every single deck. That card is ridiculous.
I know. I want it everywhere. It's great.
Yes, yes. Speaking of which, a little bit of foreshadowing. Did you play it in this year's list, in your first place list at RB2 Rulers, or am I misremembering?
Grand Mall? No. So Vayu is terrible tempo wise. It's like
Yeah,
one of the slowest tempo decks in the format. So
it's
it
really
cannot
slow,
hold up
right?
Grand Mall because you need to be ahead on tempo for Grand Mall. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes
Grand
sense.
Mall is so good against Vayu.
True, true. That's why I've been liking Grandma a lot. There's been a obviously since you won with Vayu, there's been a lot of people playing Vayu. Not only on the ladder, but just like in eight mans in the Discord and everything. So Grandma's been putting in a lot of work.
Yeah.
But this list looks honestly way ahead of its time. Like it was the first list of this kind before J4, before like Monster Gamer, before everyone was like kind of doing this type of hybrid style, and it definitely put this type of deck on the map. So one of your first innovations, and this deck earned you your invite to RBET Rulers last year. So this was your top eight RBET Rulers list from 2022. You You were mentioning before we
Yeah.
started the interview that you're the first person to top back-to-back RBET rulers, which is an incredibly impressive thing to have on your resume. Why did you play this cursed abomination though? That's really what I want to know.
So we have a theme so far from the first deck of the format that I made to the first top in the format of I come up with a cool idea and put together a build that's like decent, but like very cursed and not polished at all. And then someone else comes along later and finds the polished build of the Prisma Dark Calling or finds the polished build of Hybrid. This is the first deck where someone else, Frog Slicer, has the original build, and then I came along and polished it. The reason I brought this deck was I love building this kind of degenerate, broken stuff. I don't love playing it, to be honest. And so there was a ton of time that I spent going up to this, like 2 months or so over the summer, where I was labbing the different combo possibilities, labbing the different lines, trying different ways to gain advantage. We were on Dandy for a while, figuring out how to make those tokens work. And then finally we stumble across Level Eater, and it was so busted. And so I knew that with the deck that much more powerful than Frog Slicer's build, which already had an amazing win rate, it had to be the deck for rulers to just like win.
So this is kind of a deck that I know you mentioned at the time that you would be one of the only people to really pilot this deck to the degree of success that it had, simply because like you had put in those 2 months of
Yeah.
just like really hardcore grinding to make sure you could play it at a reasonable pace too as well. Um, I lost my train of thought. What was it? Oh yeah. How good do you think this deck holds up like nowadays to like Edison after a year?
So yeah, I promised after Rulers to put the deck down for good. And if there's like a, 50K tournament, maybe I'll pick it back up for that kind of thing. But until we're at like stakes that really matter, I'm off of it. So I don't have that many actual matches with it. In my testing with it and in my estimation of it, it seems insanely strong. But Alex Deman was the only person I know of that like took it up after me and started playing a lot with it, and he finds it to be like a B tier deck with all of his play with it, and I do think he's good enough to actually have a solid opinion of it. So my estimation's lower of it now because other people picking up the deck have not been able to find that level of success. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think a large part of this deck that makes it so powerful is the card one for one. And I think if you don't open up with one for one, like obviously you have a lot of chances to open with one for one, right? You have redraws to find it. But if you don't find the one for one, it can be really difficult to go for those early combos. I've seen variations of this list pop up using instant fusion, which is really interesting. I'm not sure if we'll see more of this type of deck in the future. I'm not sure if instant fusion was something that you tested or how that works. My biggest
I did.
issue
I
with
tested a lot of different things. It's not worth it. You really just don't need what it gives you. Yeah.
interesting. So
All
for
you
the
need is Substitute on board, Fishborg, and Graveyard. That's all you need with this deck.
because you can pitch, well, you need a card in hand, obviously, right, to pitch for Fishborg.
Yeah, you need your hand, but it doesn't matter what your hand is, basically.
Makes sense, and that's why you play the Future Fusion and the Ocean as well as just like extra ways to get the Fishborg into the grave for the Subsitote combo. So no,
In
definitely
terms
a
of
cool.
modifications for the deck, Evil Prodigy instead of Ocean, and adding back in Treeborn and maybe main decking a Mobius are the things that I've thought of for changes for it. I think the my favorite part about this deck is the fact that I can say that I have topped without Treeborn in Frogs. I think that's so funny.
That is a really cool, like, unique niche thing. Unfortunately, it's kind of ruined by all the people playing like Paleozoics in like 2017 or whatever, like the
In
crazy
Edison.
Ronin
Yeah.
in Edison. Yes, if you add the addendum in Edison, then yes, you are
True.
actually you might be the only person to top without Treeborn and Frogs. Now that I think about it. Interesting. Fun
Yeah.
fact. Fun fact. The
Yeah.
only person to top both RBET rulers and the only person to top without Treeborn and Frogs. Very based. But after this, you were not done. You know what I mean? You came back for more. You played in the second season, which was this year's tournament, and you brought back a hybrid Blackwings, which is what we're moving on to next. I don't know if you have the
I
list
did.
pulled up or anything. Or
I do. Yeah.
this time, you elected instead of pushing away from Bora, you pushed in the far direction of Zero Icarus attack. Um, and I know you mentioned, or if I was following your statements correctly after the tournament, you mentioned that you think that that's like legitimately correct in a lot of metagames and in a lot of cases. I wonder if you were to play hybrid Blackwings again, like if you had chosen to play hybrid Blackwings and RBET rulers, would you have played something like this list without Icarus attack entirely, or is that something that once again you feel like the pendulum should land somewhere in the middle?
Probably somewhere in the middle. I think I would be playing 1 to 2. The thing is, top players play around Icarus really well, play around it all the time, and so it makes Icarus very bad often against them, and I don't like cards that are ever bad. Um, but I do think some amount of it is probably worth it. At least because since they've seen me top without it, I need to show that I have it so that they respect it.
Yeah, yeah, true. How much of like playing at the top level? I mean, you've done a ton of playing at the top level, not only in these tournaments but like with your teammates as well. How much about Edison format do you think is like just knowledge of the other person's deck and the other person's tendencies? Do you think that that comes up a lot, a little bit? How do you think that that factors into like your deck building choices?
It factors in a lot to my choices for sure. Yeah. You'll notice if you watch through the videos that I'm going to be putting out of analyzing my matches, the match against Fancy Diesel, he plays around Icarus attack in my Vayu deck because he knows that I run Vayu. And I think it loses him that game. It at least puts him in a very bad position. So the fact that like this interplay happens really goes to my advantage when I'm able to make these like different building choices because of it.
Yeah, I noticed too, like, not only when I'm playing against someone who I'm like familiar with, that I'm at a significant advantage. But if someone is playing against me on stream and they've seen me like building the deck before going into the match, even if they close the stream, like they're starting at a significant advantage simply because they know the cards that they have to play around. And so I think that just because you topped without Icarus this one time, I think it's smart that you're at least thinking ahead, like, oh, people know me as that guy who topped without Icarus, so potentially they'll be less respectful of Icarus, so it'll make you want to play it more in the future. Dark Illusion is a really cool card. I am actually super surprised no one else has adapted this. I was kind of going it.
Yeah, that's kind of wild to me.
Yeah, I was kind of going over it on stream, and I'm like, this card has so many applications. Do you want to like run through some of the applications of this card that you found to be like the most useful, or?
Yeah. So when building this deck, the reason I ended up with Zero Icarus was there was a match where one of my teammates wanted to test against Blackwing. So I'm like, all right, I'll throw together a Blackwing deck quick. And I'm like, damn, this is a really spacious deck. And I only figured out after the match that I hadn't put any Icarus in there and I didn't miss it at all when playing. So that's why I ended up on Zero Icarus. And then I was testing it further and this hybrid build with no Icarus against Hero Beat and Blackwing, you're at a real disadvantage because you don't have as much back row to interact with their stuff, and their the monsters that you're adding in are like lower quality in general than their monsters. And so Dark Illusion has the neat usages of against Gemini Spark. It's really strong because it denies them the draw. It still makes them tribute the monster. And against Sirocco, if they Sirocco pump when you have Blackwings out, right? Or when they just have Blackwings out, they're targeting a dark monster on the field. You can Dark Illusion that. And that came up in tournament against a Blackwing player with Trap Stun set. So if it was not a counter trap, I would not have won.
That's insane. That's incredibly based.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, Dark
it's so
Illusion,
cool.
Cash Money, it stops Dark Armed Dragon, priority targeting your monster. It stops Brain
Yep,
Control, Mind Control, it stops Bryonic.
yep.
It
All of the
stops
most terrifying cards for the deck.
Gale Caius. It stops Caius. It stops Raikou in the damage
Yeah,
step. It is. Just an
Yeah.
unbelievable tech. I am once again shocked that nobody else has adapted this after the fact, but I'm not surprised it carried you to a top this season. And then after the season, you actually you honestly you took a break to help me out with the RBET stuff. You helped me judge one of the RBETs because you had already topped, and you're like, I don't need to top again. Like the confidence, you
Yeah,
know.
we already got it. Let's give people a chance at Swiss.
I know,
The other
right?
thing with this top before we move on, I just want to comment hybrid needs deck dev. Deck dev is the only reason that I think hybrid is viable and, in my opinion, better than pure. Notice the triple deck dev in the list, very important. Otherwise, you would just be straight up dead to fairies and plenty of other decks with recruiters. Yeah,
I'm curious. There are some differences between this list and your first list, of course. The big one
true.
being Bora the Spear, but the second one being like Burial from the Different Dimension, Upstart Goblin, obviously the triple Icarus, Phoenix Wing Windblast. There's a huge amount of different cards. You also elected to move away from Grand Mole and more towards Fossil Dyna and DD Warrior Lady. Just curious, like, do you think those changes are good or bad? Are they more meta dependent? Like, did you expect more frogs? That's why you wanted the Dynas, or what was the reasoning behind it?
I think all of those changes are good. The reasons are, yeah, frogs is a big one. Things like Dragon Turbo or Blackwings end up being damage races, and so you really want cards that do a lot of damage fast in there, and so that's why the higher monster count and everything. Burial ends up being just like too slow with the deck, too like dead a lot of the time, and I don't like drawing bricks ever. And DD Warrior Lady necessary for like consecrated light and stuff. So I think this build is a lot more refined version of the previous one. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. DD Warrior Lady also kind of powerful because it's like citing two cards for one slot because you have the Rhoda to search for it. Um, yeah, I also really like DD Warrior Lady in the mirror. I know Monster Gamer also had adapted DD Warrior Lady and Cyber Dragon as like main deck inclusions, and he played them at Nats to an X1 and 1 finish, I believe. Um, so, yeah, definitely a lot of these things we had adapted into our play groups as well, and they worked really, really well. So, really solid stuff. Really, really cool stuff. Like you said, the triple deck dev, super important. How do you feel about Blackwings in general? I mean, like two of your tops are with Blackwings. Is it a deck that you personally have an attachment to, or is it just you just played it because you thought it was fire, or is there a reason behind the fact that you played Black Wings twice?
Whenever going into a tournament, so throughout the like season, I'm always deck building in like spare time and finding different like weird things and then trying to polish them up, and then I'll have phases of being burnt out. Whenever I'm in a phase where I don't know what deck to play, Blackwings is usually the deck that going into a tournament is like, okay, this is solid. I know I have a way to make this spicy and not like have it be bad, right? I have a good build that I feel solid about that I can defend all the choices for, and other decks it's aren't quite at the power level of Blackwings usually for me to have that spice, that different build, and have it feel like a build that I'm comfortable with. So Blackwings is just, yeah, been good in that sense. The other side of it is I don't like playing 50/50s with set monsters, and Blackwings just lets you swing over and over again, and that's fun.
Yeah, yeah. I think one thing about Yu-Gi-Oh that time and time has proven to be fun is attacking, and one thing that people hate not being able to
Yeah.
do is attack. Like the dupe lock is primarily
Yep.
one of the first things newer Edison players complain about because it doesn't let them attack, and also why newer players or even experienced players really like to play Blackwings is part of the reason why Blackwings is one of my favorite decks as well. So makes sense. Just feels good. It's fast. It punishes stuff. It's got a bunch of decent cards, strong cards, and yeah. Moving on to this year's first place finish, Vou Turbo. Why the switch? Why the change?
So going into rulers, there were, I think, four decks or so that I was working on. There was Amaryllis, there was Chaos Fairies, there was Vou Turbo with Icarus, and I think there was one more. I'm blanking on it right now. But all of the other ones, I went through a phase of feeling a bit burnt out, and I couldn't get to a build that I wanted to test and feel comfortable about it in time for the tournament. So I ended up falling back on the Vayu build that was very like standardized, but also had a little bit of spice in it, and I felt really good that the spice that I added was an improvement to the deck. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is one of the first times we've seen, maybe not necessarily these cards, but these cards in this context um, do do this amount of work. And I think just having those different cards helped you. I mean, it obviously immediately helped you, like you said, in your match against Fancy Diesel. But we saw Icarus put in a lot of work on camera, not just in that match, but in the other matches as well. So um, the two main deck changes from like your quote unquote standard build is the Icarus attack and the Legacy of Yatagrasus, correct?
Yes. No Solemn, no Spirit Reaper, no Dust Tornadoes in the main, I think, are the like changes. Yeah.
Interesting. And then in the sideboard, I think the big ones that I'm looking at are double compulsory, double breaker, and the rest of the stuff looks pretty much what you'd expect to see. Is there a reason you elected to go for double breaker, double compulsory in the sideboard? Was there any inspiration from other decks or even Pro Storm's first place
From
finish
you,
last
baby.
year? For me, yeah, of
Um,
course.
No. So what actually got me onto those, there's partially you talking about Breaker Compul so much, but a big part of it was actually 10 foot because I know he's insane at value. Everyone does, to be honest. And he talks about how Compulse is like the best card against value and how Breaker, he's been loving siding that in against Raikou hamster decks. So I really just went for that for like the mirror and other Raikou hamster opponents. But it really is important to have something to turn the deck more aggro for when you need to be able to put your opponent on a clock, like Dragon Turbo. So Breaker's been insane. It's been very valuable for sure. Compulse has been a little less useful, but that's just because it seems a little more niche for when I end up wanting it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think that that's been also the case for me. Even in like decks I never expected to be like siding breakers, like quick draw. I'm just siding three now, and I'm just like, this is crazy. It comes in, and like, I think a big part of the paradigm of this format is like, can you go second into Raikou D prison? And
Yes. Yep.
Breaker does that perfectly. This deck, Vou Turbo does a great job of asking that question, like, can you answer Raikou D prison, or are you going to fall behind? And then if you have the breakers, then not only can you ask the primary question of the format, but you can answer it as well. So that's really cool. Um, Going into the tournament, were there any matchups you were like really dreading, or were there any matchups you were like, I feel comfortable in this matchup, but maybe this matchup is something I'm not super comfortable in, or what was your thought process behind like that? I guess your matchups in the tournament going into it.
Yeah. Vayu has um a terrible frog matchup in my experience. And this is mainly from the frog side of it, where if you play right as frogs, I think Vayu has a chance to win like 30% of the time, right? It's just one of the matchups where it's like Burial, Dad, Brain Control are the only three cards that matter, and if frogs can play around those, they win the game, period. So that was the matchup I was most afraid of, but because of my amount of experience playing frogs, and especially my amount of experience with that matchup, I feel pretty good facing frogs that I know how to put the most pressure on them and make them play right as long as possible. But that was the only matchup that I really felt was a bad matchup for Vayu. I think the mirror was another one where I just felt like other players like 10 foot might be able to out experience me in the mirror. Yeah.
Thankfully, I think the mirror is how do I say it? Not not very skill intensive. I've played a lot of the Vayu mirror.
Sackfest?
Yeah, I played a lot of the Vayu mirror in like testing because people will always be like, "Hey, I need to get experience in this mirror match," and uh, I'll pull out Vayu Turbo and we'll play. And it's just like it's one of the most frustrating mirror matches. I don't know how much you've played it, but it feels like you have almost no control over the way things go. But sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you just gotta accept that you have a
Yeah.
matchup like that or a matchup like frogs where it's not great, and sometimes you gotta understand that you can at least this deck, it gave you some, like you said, some angle of control to force the opponent to play right. I mean, not everyone's gonna be as technically proficient with frogs as possibly they would be in like a testing game. There's a lot of stakes in a tournament. There's fatigue in tournaments. There's pressure in tournaments that doesn't exist otherwise. There's maybe some slow play time concerns as well, so people can't take forever to think. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a massive advantage in that sense where I think frogs have a lot more thought to put into the matchup than value does.
Yeah, because value, it's just like, once again, you're asking the questions, and then the frog player kind of they have to navigate the situation. Usually they can, but they have to do it perfectly, more or less. So it makes perfect sense that you felt more comfortable just like being the one asking the questions, I guess, in this circumstance. What were your matchups like in the actual tournament? Did you end up facing any frogs, or what was probably your hardest matchup in the tournament?
I did. The frog player I faced, Diego, he never drew any payoff cards one game, and he drew triple miracle with no heroes another game. So that's how I ended up winning that one. Um, the other matchups that were hard, I think Fancy Diesel, the Vayu Mirror, was one of the ones that felt the hardest to me. I didn't really feel great about siding for it. I didn't really know like if he has two set monsters, do I set my Raiko into that? Do I not? There's a lot of like figuring out when to do things and what to do that I think in the Vayu Mirror I wasn't as confident in. But yeah, other matchups I felt very good were fine for Vayu and for me.
In the finals, Dragon Turbo, I know a lot of people in the chat, or at least after the fact, were saying that Dragon Turbo was a very bad matchup for Vayu. Is that a matchup you think is bad, or is that just a matchup that you think, like, well, Dragon Turbo is a casino deck, they're just not going to hit? Or how do you feel about that matchup in general? I know that deck's kind of like picking up a lot of popularity as well.
Well, if you just draw Burial Dad, to be honest, it's pretty fun.
I know, right? I mean, well, if you draw
I
Burial
think
Dad, like, oh my gosh, they call him Burial Dad
okay,
Dimitri. All
little
right.
tangent before I answer. Uh, People at my locals have actually started referring to me as Burial Dad Dimitri
Oh my
because of you
god.
saying
Oh
that.
my god. Ye-
Um, the matchup I think is pretty fine. Um, you have a fair amount of cards that you can activate like in response to a heavy storm. You have a fair amount of things that are annoying for them to get rid of. Setting Raikou is surprisingly hard for Dragon Turbo to deal with. And because I can side in those breakers and those dynas, I can turn the deck much more aggro so that it ends up being a lot more pressure and a faster clock against them. And so they really need to find their answers within like 3 turns. Yeah.
Breaker also has a little bit of a hidden strength in that, like, if they try to get cheeky and like set a lone reckless, you can get them reckless locked, or if they side in Royal Decree, for example, or if they set something so they don't have to discard it to rejuvenation.
And they were siding in Decree. Yeah.
Yeah. So it makes sense that, um, just have Breaker to just deal with that random stuff, force them to be in a bad situation, and also just hit them. Breaker does a good job too. It crashes with Drago in case they're like Drago locking you. Um, so
Yep.
yeah, no, that I
And
would not have thought to side in Breaker in that matchup, but I guess it makes sense, now that you're saying it.
yeah, definitely. I don't have a lot of experience with the matchup because I didn't have a lot of games under my belt with Vayu going into this, but it felt a lot like the hybrid Blackwings versus Dragon Turbo matchup, which is definitely a terrible matchup for Dragon Turbo. It's like every card in hybrid is designed to beat Dragon Turbo.
Yeah, it's Rush plus Kalute to make sure that it's hard to be reversaled, and you have Royal Oppression, you have layered interaction, you have hand traps plus whatever. In this case, you have Dyna, which is kind of a layered interaction on top of Royal Oppression. Both of those cards are very difficult for the Turbo player to play through without specific
Deck
outs.
devs.
Deck devs as well, yes. So lots of different like points of interaction where you can make it difficult for them to find exactly what it is for them to OTK you. And then on top of that, their deck just has to perform, which 30% of the time the deck just bricks. So um, it makes sense. It
Yeah.
makes sense. Uh, really solid stuff. Is this a deck you think you're going to play a lot of moving forward, or is this just something that you think you wanted to try out for this tournament, or how do you feel about Vou Turbo into
I
the future of Edison?
I don't like bringing the same build to multiple tournaments. I like having something original and spicy in every list, and I don't know how much more I'll have with Vayu because it's such a standardized deck already, relatively. So I probably won't be bringing it to other Ribbits in the future, but I don't know, if I find something cool, I'm totally down to. It was fun playing it and drawing dad all the time.
Yeah, yeah, that does make sense. If you do draw specifically burial death. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not saying anything. And honestly, I
No, yeah.
that is part of
I
the
mean, I was
reason
lucky. I was definitely very lucky.
that's part of the reason I respect you a lot as a player is you don't show up with the same exact shit that everyone else is doing. You always mix it up. Every one of these decks we've looked at today, all four of these decks you've topped with have been like they've been Dimitri's deck, and I think that that's like one of the sickest things. Not very many players can say that about it, and so it makes me very happy and very proud that you won this. Honestly, so congrats, Dimitri. And
Thanks. It's great to hear that.
yeah, I think if you guys want to see more of Dimitri, his matches from the tournament, more in-depth explanations, I say just go check him out on YouTube. I think that's going to conclude this interview, and thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.